Do you believe that love can transcend time? Imagine a flower that even after 100 years keeps a secret capable of reviving a story of passion and sacrifice. In an ordinary botanical garden, a young botanist discovers a dried flower, forgotten by time, accompanied by letters that speak of eternal love and promises never fulfilled. But what seemed like just a historical curiosity soon turns into a journey full of mysteries, twists and turns, and an inexplicable connection with the past. How far would you go to unlock the secrets of an immortal love? Get ready for a story that will captivate you from beginning to end. Dr. Victor, this flower could be something really important, Clara insisted, holding the small dry sample between her fingers. His eyes sparkled with a mixture of curiosity and determination. Clara, we don't have time for botanical toys, replied Victor dismissively as he organized some papers on the table. Just sort and file it away. We have more relevant projects. Clara swallowed her frustration. There was something about that flower that fascinated her from the moment she saw it. Looking away to hide his dissatisfaction, he watched Alenkar's descendants leave the room with hopeful expressions. Earlier that day, the descendants of a renowned botanist from the last century had arrived at the Elysian garden carrying a small box and 2 old letters. The flower inside the box was dry, seemingly lifeless, but according to them, it was a precious heirloom with a special meaning. This flower represents our great-grandfather's greatest work. We would like her to have a worthy place, explained one of the descendants, a man with a deep voice and formal posture. Clara, listening to the conversation from the corner of the room, felt a spark of curiosity. As he looked at the letters, he noticed one of them was sealed, while the other was open, displaying ancient and elegant handwriting. Victor, however, seemed impatient, nodding his head mechanically as he held the box. Of course, we will do our best to honor this heritage, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Soon after the visitors left, Victor handed the items to Clara with little enthusiasm. Do what is necessary, but don't waste too much time on it. In the silence of her small office, Clara opened the unsealed letter. When I started reading, I felt like I was being transported to another time. Dear Isabel, this flower, which I named the Eternal Rose, is my greatest creation. It symbolizes our eternal love, which transcends time and death. Until this flower blooms again, do not open the second letter. The emotion contained in Dr. Alenkar's words touched Clara deeply. As someone who had dedicated her life to plants, she knew the value of something that could revive after appearing dead. The idea of bringing that flower back to life, as a tribute to the love described in the letter, was irresistible. Clara looked at the dried flower again. The challenge of reviving it fascinated her, but Victor would never allow her to dedicate time to something so risky. She knew she would have to act on her own. That night, as silence enveloped the Elysian garden, Clara returned to the laboratory. Holding the letter and the flower, he began to examine the manuscript for clues. If this flower really has the power to bloom again, I'm going to find out how, she muttered to herself, determined. Time seemed to stop as Clara studied every detail of the letter and investigated the properties of the flower. Despite her tiredness, she felt energized by an inexplicable force, as if Alenkar's own spirit was guiding her. As her fingers slid over the dried petal, Clara whispered, I won't let your story be forgotten. Clara was immersed in her work, but the silent night in the laboratory was interrupted by footsteps echoing in the hallway. Startled, she turned quickly when the door creaked open. I didn't know the lab was so popular at night, said a tall man with shaggy brown hair and piercing eyes. He smiled amiably. My name is Gabriel. I'm the new volunteer. Clara tried to hide the manuscript she was reading. I don't usually have company here. It's something private. It looks interesting. "Is it about that dried flower I saw earlier?" he asked, leaning slightly to peer. Clara hesitated before answering, but something about Gabriel seemed genuine, almost comforting. "It's Eterna's rose. I'm trying to revive it. There are instructions in this letter, but it is a complicated process." "The rose of Eterna?" Gabriel raised his eyebrows, looking intrigued. "I've heard about rare plants that have regenerative properties. This is fascinating. Can I help?" She narrowed her eyes, suspicious. "Why would you be interested? I have experience with botany, especially in rare species. I think we can work together on this." Although reluctant, Clara realized that Gabriel's knowledge could be useful. After a moment of silence, he sighed and held out the manuscript. "All good, but you have to promise not to tell anyone, especially Dr. Victor. Your secret is safe with me." In the following nights, Gabriel proved to be more than a simple volunteer. He seemed to know surprising details about rare plants and their regeneration cycles. As they worked together, Clara was impressed by his ability to interpret the letter's instructions and suggest precise adjustments to environmental conditions. "You're good at this. Maybe even too good," Clara commented, frowning in doubt. "How is someone with so much knowledge just volunteering here?" Gabriel smirked. "Let's say I like working with plants without the pressure of big jobs." Despite the evasive answer, Clara found herself increasingly confident in the partnership. Together, they adjusted the temperature and humidity of the environment, following the guidelines in the manuscript. Each step was meticulously reviewed, and the flower began to show signs of change. "Look, the extremities are becoming more malleable," Clara exclaimed one night, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. Gabriel approached to observe. "It's working. We are closer than I expected." The partnership between them seemed natural, but Clara couldn't ignore the feeling that there was something more in Gabriel. However, progress with Eterna's rose was a priority, and she put her doubts aside for now. While Clara was reviewing notes, Gabriel approached with an unexpected suggestion. "What if we used soil with specific mineral properties? It can accelerate the rehydration process of flower cells." "That's a good idea, but where would we get something like that?" Clara asked, intrigued. Gabriel smiled enigmatically. "Leave it to me." The next day, he showed up with a soil sample that looked perfect for the experiment. Clara didn't ask how he did it, but she was grateful. As the flower began to regain some of its vitality, Clara couldn't help but feel a growing emotional connection to the project and to Gabriel. However, he knew there was still a long way to go before he reached his goal. "We're almost there, Gabriel. Thank you for being here. Clara, I'm not just here out of curiosity. I want to see this flower bloom as much as you do." She smiled, feeling strangely safe next to him. But deep down, a new doubt was forming. Who was Gabriel, really? The silence in the laboratory was broken by the sudden sound of the door being opened. Clara and Gabriel turned around at the same time, only to be faced with the enraged figure of Dr. Victor. "What's going on here?" he barked, pointing to the table where Eterna's rose rested surrounded by scattered instruments and notes. Clara swallowed hard, but tried to maintain her composure. "Dr. Victor, I can explain." "Explain?" he interrupted, his eyes shining with anger. "You disobeyed my orders and used garden resources without permission. You're fired, Clara." "Wait!" Gabriel intervened, placing himself between Victor and Clara. "Dr. Victor, the work we are doing here is important. This flower may have extraordinary properties, but you are not seeing it." Victor laughed, sarcastic. "And who are you to tell me what to see? He's just a volunteer, with no relevance whatsoever in this place." Gabriel remained firm, his voice controlled, but full of authority. "I'm not just a volunteer, Dr. Victor. My name is Gabriel Lemos, member of the Board of Directors of Jardim Elysian. I have monitored your decisions and the way you run this institution, and frankly, I'm disappointed." Victor turned pale. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. "Clara is right to insist on this project," Gabriel continued, his tone incisive. This flower is a milestone, and you should support it instead of stifling the initiative. Furthermore, your disrespectful attitude and lack of vision will be included in my next report to the board." Clara watched the scene with her heart racing. For a moment, she wondered if Gabriel was serious, but the conviction in his voice and stance was unquestionable. Victor took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. I didn't know you were—" "That's clear," Gabriel interrupted firmly. "Now, with your permission, we must continue our work." With no other option, Victor left, defeated. Clara released the breath she didn't even realize she was holding, and looked at Gabriel with a mixture of gratitude and surprise. "Are you from the council? Why didn't you ever tell me?" Gabriel smiled slightly. "I didn't want it to interfere with how you treated me. I prefer to work alongside people, not above them." Clara nodded, still processing what had just happened. But there was no time to reflect. When they turned to the flower, something extraordinary happened. "Look!" Clara exclaimed, pointing to the plant. Eterna's rose began to slowly open, revealing a subtle glow in its regenerated petals. It was as if the flower was alive again, radiating an almost magical energy. "We did it," Gabriel murmured, watching in amazement. Clara felt tears fill her eyes as the moment enveloped her. "It's more than I could imagine." Remembering the second letter, Clara ran to get it. Her hands shook as she broke the ancient seal. Gabriel approached, curious. Clara read the words aloud. "Dear Isabel, if this flower bloomed again, it means that our eternal love has survived the barriers of time. May she be a symbol that life and love always find a way." Clara and Gabriel exchanged a meaningful look. They were connected to something much bigger than they could understand. "I don't think this story is over yet," said Clara, her voice full of emotion. "It's just beginning," Gabriel replied with a slight smile. Clara and Gabriel sat side by side, the second letter open on the table, while Eterna's rose glowed softly in the laboratory light. Still absorbing the meaning of the words, Clara took a deep breath before speaking. "Gabriel, it's like we're connected to them in some way." "I agree," he replied, looking fixedly at the flower. "There is something in this story that goes beyond simple coincidences." As they watched the rose, a warmth enveloped the room, almost like an invisible hug. Clara blinked, confused, as the view around her began to change. Suddenly, they were no longer in the laboratory. They both found themselves in an ancient garden, surrounded by leafy trees and exotic flowers. Her clothes had changed, and Clara realized that she was wearing a long, delicate dress, typical of 100 years ago. Gabriel, at his side, was dressed elegantly, similar to what Alenka would wear. "Where are we?" asked Clara, her voice low and trembling. "I think we're in the past, or something close to it," Gabriel replied, amazed as he looked around. At that moment, a familiar figure appeared in front of them. Dr. Alenka himself, holding Eterna's rose, still intact. Beside him stood Isabel, a woman of serene beauty who radiated love and devotion. "Are they us?" muttered Clara, feeling a wave of overwhelming emotion. Alenka and Isabel looked directly at them, as if they recognized them. Without saying a word, Isabel smiled, while Alenka extended the rose towards Clara. The flower glowed more brightly, as if uniting the four into a single line of fate. Suddenly, Clara and Gabriel felt a force pulling them back, and the garden of the past disappeared, giving way to the laboratory again. They were both panting, as if they had run a long distance. "Was that real?" asked Clara, placing her hand on her chest. "He was. Somehow we were led to them to understand the meaning of all this," Gabriel replied, still in shock. Clara looked at the flower, now fully bloomed. Its soft glow seemed to contain the memories and feelings of Alenka and Isabel. "They entrusted us with the task of continuing this story," she said. with renewed determination. Gabriel nodded and picked up a piece of paper. "I think it's time to write the next letter." Together, they sat down and began to write. The words flowed naturally, as if they came from another time. A day like today, 100 years ago, Eterna's rose bloomed again. Its brilliance is proof that true love never dies, transcends time, and unites us no matter where we are. After signing the letter, Clara placed it next to the flower. An intense glow filled the laboratory, like a beam of light radiating from the distant past. They both looked at each other, overcome by emotion. Gabriel held Clara's hand. "I think we've finally completed their cycle." She smiled, feeling a deep and inexplicable connection. Maybe true love never needs an end. Eterna's rose continued to glow softly, like a beacon of hope and eternal love, as Clara and Gabriel left the laboratory, knowing that their lives would never be the same.